Welcome back. Welcome back. We're live for the second session of Swarm's AI Career Triathlon. And as I mentioned in the previous one, this is a 1 day full programming schedule to help you manage and improve your career with respects to the development of AI technologies. My name is Joaquin Milada, and I'm the founder of the Swarm community. Today we have Garima Gujral, and we're going to be talking about how to incorporate AI into your work. Garima, if you would be so kind as to give us, the high level view of who you are and some of the things you've done, and please mention the publications. I think that's super rad.
Oh, yeah. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. I'm Garima. I'm currently working as an ontologist with Amazon. So I'm responsible for building the knowledge graph that goes behind the Amazon shopping websites. And I've been in the knowledge graphs or taxonomies and ontology space for like 6 years now, where I've been mostly focusing on e commerce and retail taxonomies. I used to work with Walmart before in a very similar role, designing their website taxonomies and ontologies. Other than that, I've been actively engaged in onboarding AI workflows as part of my role, exploring this space from around 2023, which had a pivot shift in my role, and also part of certain resource groups where we get together and decode anything related to connected data or linked data space. I'm also a passionate researcher and been working on several publications in the form of book chapters, research papers, and articles that Håkan mentioned before. So that's mostly around the work I do and how I entered into this space. But happy to share more as we go along.
Thank you, Garima. And as Garima is mentioning here, this is an open conversation. If you have any particular burning questions that's relevant to your work or your career, please feel free to ask in the comments. But with that, let's sort of set the scene and contextualize this ontology, taxonomy, e-commerce. I'd love to understand that in a little bit more granular detail and maybe have some examples. So let's start with the e-commerce portion. What is it that you do for an e-commerce website?
Okay, yeah. So my part of role is more around your end-to-end customer journey. So if I start from the customer side, anytime you log on to an e-commerce website, you search for something, or you try to navigate through the category menus on top or the filters, trying to filter the products. So I'm responsible for creating those filters and deciding the whole journey. And a part of this has several steps, right from the time a product is onboarded by sellers or vendors. What is the metadata they should fill? How do we process it inside? What are all these stages that it passes through? How it should reflect to help customers make a buying decision. I'm responsible for that end-to-end process. And from a user side or a customer side, what you see is, I could say broadly, all the filters that you see and what filters appears when you look for, say, a coffee mug. So a color filter, a capacity, is it a one cup with patterns, or what is the material it's made for? Everything is designed and stored in the backend in the form of a graph, because it's something which we cannot design linearly. So we have all these facets for a particular item that I design and work on modeling when it comes to the e-commerce side. Yeah.
It's interesting the work that you do, and I love that you had the mug right in front of you as an example. Um, we take for granted that there's objects, and objects are just happen to be put into categories that we can search for, but somebody has to sort them and organize them and classify them. Um, and how much, what is involved in that kind of work? Where do you start, and how do you derive to the customer journey? Let's let's see if we could set that up.
Sure, yeah. I think, like I mentioned, the starting point comes from our source of data. So it's sellers and vendors who come to us with their products. Like, okay, I want to sell this cup. So we would ask them, certain questions around, like, okay, what is the material, what are the colors, where is it made in, what country does it come from. So we'll have a preset list of metadata fields that we ask them to fill in or provide us details on. And extracting from those metadata aspects, we see, okay, what is customer relevant or not. So in case of this cup, maybe the method of manufacturing is not something which would help a customer take the buying decision. So that's something which, but we still need it because there are some legal aspects when it comes to food products or grades. So that's where the sorting takes place, and we decide on to the customer facing filters that should be converted. Again, now for the customer facing filters, what comes into this next step is, do we want to overload you with all the details? Like, okay, for me, if I want to search a cup just for Mother's Day occasion, I don't care about all the other 20K product cups which are on the website. So that's when we introduce like an occasion aspect. So we try to keep all these nuanced use cases of customer journeys, tracking it also from the search perspective, the browse perspective, how customers browse products or how they search for it. And like I mentioned, the Mother's Day example, we also have these campaigns for occasions or festivals that are being created side by side. If there's like a summer sale or a Christmas sale, what are the high value product or nodes that we need to design our taxonomies against? So there are a lot of parallel processes that run when it comes to the e-commerce side of the graph. Another area is for recommendation systems. So if you're buying an iPhone, we want a screen protector to be recommended along with. So how is these two related? Defining these relationship between uh, extremely different products. Like, okay, if what's compatible, what would be the compatible cables or the charging plugs that come along. So all of these needs to be codified for the machine to understand, and that's where we decide the structures on what entity is linked to what. Like, okay, iPhone is linked to this particular brand of charger or not. So these are some relationship based modeling that I do on a day-to-day basis.
What a comprehensive breakdown of all the considerations of timeliness, aboutness, and so much empathy is given towards the intention of a buyer and their buying criteria, buying decisions. Um, in a previous conversation, you've talked about some of the early experiments that you have conducted within your team on leveraging LLMs and generative AI in your workflows. So perhaps that could be a way for you to introduce this in the context of a lot of the things that you do that rely heavily on human judgment.
Sure, yeah. So as part of my work, like I mentioned, the scale is huge, especially when it comes to retail. It's humanly impossible for one person to have the expertise also in fashion or automotive or consumables. So that's where we've been slowly integrating and leveraging AI based workflows. And when it comes to the AI space, I would say we are slowly trying to embed the workflows in our pre existing processes that are in place. So the whole hype around, is AI going to replace my job or all these tasks that we do, that's where it comes into. So another way to look at it is, we're trying to embed AI mostly in the workflows where it's a list of repetitive tasks or redundant tasks that needs to be taken place. But the final human judgment layer is where an ontologist and the team I work with, which comes into play. So AI can design 5 facets for this cup, like, okay, the color, material, or so on, but who has to design, review, and check off those final AI generated models? That's where the whole idea of human judgment plays a big role in our workflows. Like, what is the ground truth against which AI would work? So at the stage where we are still training our models is also another space where we design that ground truth data set for the AI. And for judgment, at least personally, how I used like to take it ahead is it something which when it comes to a workflow, does AI comes as my first thought or a second brain or a thinking partner? So that's how I like to see it in that rather than replacing it with ownership, having it as a collaborative layer to support my judgment, but the final judgment remains with the human in the loop.
So you said something very interesting in the earlier part of your explanation. Uh, you said you try to select use cases that are repetitive and sort of boring, and that would require a lot of time. So how, like, what are some classifications of those kinds of tasks? And also, as a subsequent question, what are some of the use cases or tasks that you complete with the Copilot?
Okay, sure. Yeah. So one of the example is when it comes to defect detection, detecting any semantic duplicates or spelling errors that come into place. Like, okay, for a website which is in US, what is the right spelling of color versus the UK English? So workflows like this, detecting defects in our schema, that's what we've been trying to outsource through AI, or designing some validation checks for our schema. These are also some repetitive tasks like, okay, we have a list of 50 standards that it should meet. Is the title casing correct? For the filter name, is the naming correct? What is the case being used? Is it singular, plural? So examples like these where I've seen like great success with AI, where we had a definite set of rules that it had to work against, and it was able to provide the findings and perform those validation checks. But some of the more complicated parts where human judgment still remains is the most important is when it comes to the semantic duplication. Say, is length same as table leg length or base length? Where does the difference come? So, or is microwavable safe a suitable filter for pizza trays? So areas like this where these edge cases and nuances are where we are trying to provide more and more concept based layer. Apart from that, another area which is more repetitive and redundant is in terms of meeting the internal based requests that we get. Like, okay, can AI be the first respondent or reviewer when it comes to throughput? If a human is reviewing that request, it takes like a good 20 minutes to understand the problem statement, go back, ask follow-up question to our requesters. So can we have that already processed by AI and it reaches us to update stage? Okay, everything this criteria meets, can we go ahead? If not, that's when we pull in the humans. So these are some repetitive tasks that I'm trying to automate more and more.
And for the Copilot, how does that work in your current stream of production in your area of responsibility?
Copilot in terms of, so once areas of responsibilities have also majorly shifted. Earlier I was responsible for this end-to-end process, also making the execution part, but I would say now the responsibilities has shifted more on the governance side, where I'm not the one who's executing each step, but more on the designing of the process, as well as conducting the design review for the final AI output, and also feeding that design review back to the iterating to improve our precision and recall parameters. That's how it has taken a major shift from, I would say, implementer to more, say, ontology governance, or looking at this high level overview where the larger picture has broadened up for me rather than just looking at a specific aspect of tasks.
In the last couple of years, it was more driven on tooling. There was a lot more focus on LLMs and generative AI as prompts and prompt engineering, just setting up conditions and repetitive tasks to be completed. But in the more current, this year in particular, it's gotten hot to talk about agents and, create a digital worker, digital labor. So how has that shifted your experimentation and informed your work?
Okay. Yeah, I think That's been a great shift when I say the focus from tooling, because it is actually giving us that quite a reality that okay, a tool or a particular model cannot like solve all your problems. It needs to be at a very broader level. So in terms of my role, when it comes to experimenting with just tooling or prompting, it was more say I would say. One-on-one process where we were iterating, looking at a very small problem and just building on it. But now, with all these AI agents or AI workforce, it is also where we are trying to capture a cross team effort or the whole larger workplace. What would be the impacts when this workflow is embedded into our systems? That has changed a lot. So it's not just okay automating a process just for giving us immediate result, but also considering various other factors like how much of cost effectiveness does it provide, what are the risk criteria that it's working against, and what are the areas of KPIs that we look at which is helping us design or embed this workflow. So that's one space where I've seen a major shift from just a process oriented approach to now a larger cross team effort that's taking place, focusing more on the throughput area too. Like, how can we improve throughput effort for the team, and where does the final governance side that comes into play for all these processes?
Are you finding clear limitations on the employment of these AI agents as you start to experiment with these? I mean, you mentioned costs being a big factor of whether or not to proceed with it, but do you also see it, having a reliability, consistent behavior? Like, what are some of those limitations that are informing how you land and expand the use of these things?
Sure. So, when it comes to limitation or a challenge that I've been facing particularly is also how to make sure parallelly work with AI versus our existing process. Because while we are in this transition phase, it's not something where we can stop our ongoing day to day processes. We also need to deliver on those terms while at the same time experiment. So, this experimentation is not something which we would just immediately want to replace against the well established workflows. So that's one challenge where, okay, we are delivering, ensuring these new processes are also slowly taking over. So maintaining that balance in terms of the timelines or ETAs that we decide, that's one space. And in terms of reliability, testing it against the ground truth data that I previously shared, like as an ontologist, if I provide, okay, these are the 50 true cases, 50 false cases, the demo would work pretty well. But when it comes to a larger data set with more and more nuances, how does it perform? So it's a process where we have to keep on iterating. uh, at least I feel with AI, it's not at all something that you can say, okay, this is complete and signed off. And with this scope at which technologies are emerging, we have to quickly be ready for the context switch. So previously, some of the LLM based checks that are developed or the workflows that are developed, now we have to translate them into more and more agent instructions and prompts which an agent can consume. So keeping up with that transition is also one area where I wouldn't say is a limitation, but it's also a fun challenge to work with where you balance out the two spaces. Because at the same time, we also want to keep on continuing our processes and not and make sure we're not completely.
Oh, it seems like we lost Garima. Let's give her a chance to rejoin the session.
Uh,
Yeah, there she is.
I think I dropped due to a connection issue. Yeah,
You're back.
sure.
So, as you cut off, I guess that's a transition for the next question. Shutri was asking in the comments, great talk. How do we see the impact of evaluations of generative AI moving forward? And do you always see a need for custom evaluations?
Yes, I would say so, especially in the retail space. If I come from that, we do have a lot of these custom based evaluations or cases that we need to look into. And I think that's what also helps then rather than just using a broader use case to be also be able to provide that judgment layer to the AI models where it can switch context based on these custom cases. So we're trying to cover more and more of these custom change types or use cases to build the whole judgment layer.
It's really interesting what you're saying around the testing and evaluation. And you made mention of having a series of test cases. So, to me, this sounds like quality assurance, where in the software realm, you have unit tests that specify specific assertions, whether they pass or fail,
Yeah,
which determine the quality of the system and how reliant and, consistently it's performing across cycles of production. um, what other considerations are required for this enterprise grade quality to be accepted in your research and development function?
sure. So one area where majorly I saw the shift from flat LLM based to more generated or agentic based solution was like information alone is not intelligence. Context and structure are what makes these AI systems more and more intelligent. So across these standards, these are also very evolving. And one success case where I found was every time I've been feeding on to the reasoning for the AI itself to provide why it came with a particular decision. It's also helping us iterate back against what needs to be improved or what needs to be added back. So that's one space through which we design our standards. Again, standards are very particular to the space we are working in. So, for example, I've also worked with a lot of legal context when it comes to, say, particulars about batteries, and every country would have their own guidelines and restrictions. So, there we have to look into, is this something which we are ready to automate yet, or we need a human judgment to take place, and till which extent we can use AI. Like, okay, we can use it in the process for generation versus does the AI based recommendation productionalize, or first a human design reviews it. So taking that call between at which stage the workflow needs to stop for AI and human needs to be looped in. Whereas we have also had certain simpler use cases where we could just productionalize and it had no issues so far. So that's how we experiment with it.
So in this conversation, we're sort of taking for granted all the pre-existing work that you've done and the work of your colleagues. But say, for example, you had to develop the structure from scratch in the highest level possible, so we don't drown people with information. Um, and you had to incorporate AI as an AI native workflow. Where would you begin to assess and audit how to incorporate it, and how would you proceed to validate that the products from the AI tools or agents are conformant with your human judgment?
Sure. I think the first step would be incorporating it into understanding the customer needs layers. For example, an exercise which pre AI we used to do manually was understanding or looking into these patterns for customer search keywords that they use while shopping. So, that stage, if I'd go just by example, is something which I would embed AI to conduct and pattern recognition exercise for me. Say for a particular country or a demographic, what has been the pattern for customers which are of this age. So that would be the first step. Second area where from that pattern extraction layer comes into the reasoning layer where we try to force, okay, based on the patterns that were identified, what could be the structures. Do we want to use like in pre-existing structure, map it against this new area? Because instead of reinventing the field, what we try is embedding or mapping against our existing schema, because uh, that's what is something which we already have as the source of truth. So mapping it against that schema and then finding where the gaps are. So using it in terms of these gap analysis, or the second layer of exercise, and third layer where I would say in terms of actually generating the schema or productionalizing the missing elements. So these are the core areas which come into my mind where it comes to just embedding the workflow in my process if it needs to be from the scratch.
So audits, needs assessment, and then a gap analysis, and then planning to actually execute the work and verifying what is remaining in the work to be done. Okay.
Like a high level flow.
And what are some of the more qualitative areas that other qualitative areas that you've incorporated AI into your workflow? Do you use it for internal communications or reporting, or anything to do with interpersonal requirements?
Sure. I think with AI, some of the most impactful areas always go very invisible. Certain small tasks like generating meeting summaries, which make a huge difference as compared to person preparing those summaries. So all these small day-to-day tasks where the whole AI work goes invisible is also really, really impactful, I feel, generating meeting summaries or summarizing some doc reviews or brainstorming against our existing docs and patterns. Like providing this kickstart is where I feel AI has been really helpful when I've been using it. It also has been able to change that baseline of work, like what was the starting line. So it already gives you an edge to begin with a process. Like if I have a 50-page doc and it's the AI model is able to summarize it for me, I'm already at a much farther baseline than somebody who would start from the scratch. So these small processes where it's been really helpful with structuring already available like text information into a more pattern information. Or if I go with a more ontology specific part, is like, okay, if I provided some of these rules on how to write ontology, it can follow it well. So these are some day-to-day areas that I've been using it more, like preparing my to-do list, scanning through the messages and making sure I'm providing replies, or if they're pending AIs for me at the end of the day. So all these small areas which have been a major huge lift off me now.
Looking forward with where things are moving, where are you focusing your efforts in research and development?
I think when it comes to things moving, I would say my focus is more on the side where more and more where we could reduce the redundancy part of work. And that's something more related to work. But if I come to a more personal space, which really excites me and I'm interested is in terms of AI fairness and policy area that I'm interested in learning more and more about. Uh, AI based fairness, how it comes into, especially when it comes to the gender aspect of AI, that I'm very eager to explore and understand how it's impacting on the biases that are being fed. That is one space that always draws my attention.
That's a really rich and fascinating area. If you have an employee and they make a mistake, who's liable for that mistake? And then in turn, when you look at AI agents, if you have a tool that doesn't have any consciousness, who absorbs the liability of the mistakes of those things if it produces some sort of negative impact on society?
Exactly, exactly. And that's where, which also draws, I would say, not a concern, but an intrigue within me. Like, at least at a small org level, we do come across these cases day to day where the result was not correct, or there was something completely absurd that came in. And we have a small workflow or a chain of people that we can work together to fix it. But now, when AI is embedding into these day to day processes and this larger whole real life processes, that's where I feel understanding who do we hold accountable, because it's not something which is it's generating by itself. We are the ones who are feeding it back or feeding the content it generates. So that's where the whole responsible use of AI comes into place. So as users itself, we need to be really responsible.
Thank you, Garima, for this lovely conversation. You have been absolutely prepared up to your eyebrows. Like you had every response fully detailed. We're going to take a short intermission and then we're going to be back with the next one. But then we're going to see you later in the panel discussion.
Sure.
So
See you soon.
thank you all.
Okay, bye.